The certified letter from the Homeowners Association arrived on a Tuesday morning, and I knew before opening it that my life in Riverside Meadows subdivision was about to get complicated. I'm Isaac Quinton, and I had just moved into this quiet neighborhood outside Phoenix, Arizona, 6 months ago. The place seemed perfect at first: well-maintained homes, decent neighbors, and most importantly, enough space on my property to park my 32-foot RV. That RV represented years of saving and weekend adventures exploring the Southwest, and I wasn't about to let anyone tell me I couldn't keep it on my own land. But apparently, someone had a problem with it. The letter was formal, typed in crisp Arial font, and signed by one Brenda Morrison, president of the Riverside Meadows HOA board. It informed me that I was in violation of Section 7.3 of the HOA bylaws regarding oversized vehicles, and that I had received a fine of $500. Furthermore, if the RV wasn't removed within 7 days, I would be fined an additional $500 per week until compliance was achieved. I read it twice, feeling my blood pressure rise with each word. When I had purchased my home, I had specifically checked the HOA documents. There was a restriction on parking RVs in driveways or on the street, but nothing about parking them on your own property behind a fence. My RV sat in my backyard, barely visible from the road behind a 6-foot privacy fence. You would have to actively look for it to even know it was there. I decided to handle this the civil way first. I called the number listed on the letter and reached Brenda Morrison directly. "Morrison Residence," a sharp voice answered. "Hello, this is Isaac Quinton from 4287 Desert Vista Drive. I received a letter today about my RV, and I think there might be some confusion." "Oh, Mr. Quinton, yes, there's no confusion. Your RV is in clear violation of our community standards. It's an eyesore and brings down property values." I took a breath, keeping my voice level. "Mrs. Morrison, I've reviewed the bylaws carefully. The restriction is on street parking and driveways. My RV is on my property behind a fence. It's barely visible." "It's visible from Mrs. Henderson's second-story window," she said, as if that settled everything. "We have standards in this community, Mr. Quinton. Standards that we expect everyone to uphold. The fine stands, and if you don't remove that vehicle, further action will be taken." "What further action?" "Legal action, if necessary. We have the authority to place a lien on your property." "I suggest you comply." Her voice had turned cold and dismissive. "I'd like to attend the next HOA meeting to discuss this." "The meetings are for board members only. We'll notify you of our decisions. Good day, Mr. Quinton." She hung up before I could respond. I sat there staring at my phone, anger mixing with disbelief. I had dealt with difficult people before, but this was something else. This was someone drunk on the tiny amount of power they'd been given, wielding it like a weapon against anyone who didn't fall in line. That evening, I pulled out all my property documents. My house sat on a 1-acre lot at the end of Riverside Meadows Drive, the main road that wound through the entire subdivision. When I had purchased the property, I had done extensive title research because the price had seemed almost too good. What I found was interesting. My property had been part of a larger ranch that was subdivided in the 1990s. The developer had kept a strip of land that became Riverside Meadows Drive, and eventually, that strip had been sold to my grandfather, Frank Quinton. He had purchased it as an investment in 2003, planning to hold it and see if the area developed. It had, but he'd never sold. When he passed away 3 years ago, his entire estate came to me, his only grandchild. I had inherited not just his house in Tucson, which I'd sold, but also several parcels of land he'd accumulated over the years. I had gone through all the paperwork with my attorney, making sure everything was properly transferred. I pulled out the specific deed now, reading it carefully. The property was described as a 60-foot wide easement, approximately 1 mile long, constituting the entirety of Riverside Meadows Drive from where it connected to the public road, Desert Springs Boulevard, all the way through the subdivision. I owned the road. The subdivision had an easement to use it, granted in perpetuity to the residents of Riverside Meadows, but I owned the actual land. My grandfather had granted the easement as a courtesy, probably never imagining it would matter. But easements could have conditions. They could be modified by the landowner within reason. I sat back, a plan forming in my mind. I wasn't going to be bullied by an overzealous HOA president, but I also wasn't going to be reckless. I needed to talk to a lawyer first. The next morning, I drove to the office of Patricia Chen, a real estate attorney who had helped me with my home purchase. Her office was in downtown Phoenix, in a modern building with views of the desert mountains. "Isaac, good to see you," she said, shaking my hand. Patricia was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense. "What brings you in?" I explained the situation, showing her the HOA letter and then the deed to Riverside Meadows Drive. She read both documents carefully, then pulled up the property records on her computer. "This is interesting," she said after a few minutes. "You definitely own the land. The easement is clearly documented, but it's a standard access easement. Nothing in here prevents you from imposing reasonable conditions, as long as you're not blocking access." "What kind of conditions?" "Well, you could require maintenance fees. You could restrict certain uses. You could even potentially revoke access for specific properties if they are in breach of an agreement with you, though that's trickier and would require careful legal maneuvering." She looked up at me. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that if the HOA wants to play hardball about what I do on my property, they should understand that their access to their homes depends on my property too. I'm not trying to block anyone or cause problems. I just want them to leave me alone." Patricia nodded slowly. "Let me do some research and draft a formal response to their letter. In the meantime, don't pay that fine. You're not in violation of any legitimate bylaw. If they want to push this, we'll push back. Legally." I left her office feeling better. This wasn't about revenge, it was about standing up to bullying. But I also knew from experience that bullies rarely back down when first confronted. Things were likely to get worse before they got better. Sure enough, 3 days later, another letter arrived. This one informed me that due to my continued non-compliance, the weekly fine was now in effect. I owed $1,000, with more accruing. There was also a notice that the HOA board would be discussing additional enforcement measures at their next meeting. I called Patricia immediately. "Don't worry," she said. "I've prepared a comprehensive response. It's being delivered to Mrs. Morrison today by certified mail. I think she's going to be very surprised." The letter Patricia drafted was a masterpiece of legal writing. It informed the HOA that I was not in violation of any enforceable bylaw, that their interpretation of Section 7.3 was incorrect, and that any attempt to impose fines or liens would be met with legal action. But that was just the opening salvo. The letter went on to inform the HOA that I, as the owner of Riverside Meadows Drive, would be exercising my rights to impose an annual maintenance fee of $500 per household for use of the private road. The fee was due within 30 days. Properties that failed to pay would be in violation of the terms of access, and while I would not block their easement rights, I would pursue collection through legal channels. It was perfectly legal, perfectly reasonable, and perfectly calculated to make a point. The response was swift and furious. My phone rang at 7 in the morning, 2 days after Patricia's letter was delivered. I answered groggily, not recognizing the number. "How dare you?" Brenda Morrison's voice was shrill with rage. "This is extortion. This is illegal. You can't charge us to use our own road." "Good morning, Mrs. Morrison," I said, suddenly wide awake. "It's not your road, it's mine. You have an easement to use it, but the land belongs to me. The maintenance fee is completely legal. This is because of the RV fine. You're retaliating." "No, Mrs. Morrison. I'm exercising my property rights just like you claimed you were doing. The difference is my rights are actually documented and legal. We'll fight this. We'll take you to court. That's your choice. My attorney is ready. But while you're considering that, maybe you should reconsider your position on my RV. You know, the one that's legally parked on my property, bothering no one except apparently Mrs. Henderson's view from her second-story window." She sputtered for a moment, then hung up. I knew I had put myself in the middle of a war, but I felt oddly energized. Sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. I knew Brenda wasn't the type to back down easily. She was probably rallying her forces, consulting with the HOA's attorney, plotting her next move. Then, on Saturday morning, I found out what that move was. I was working in my garage when I heard voices from the street. Looking out, I saw Brenda Morrison standing on the sidewalk in front of my house with about 15 other residents. She was holding a clipboard and appeared to be giving some kind of speech. I walked out to see what was happening. "And we cannot allow this kind of bullying in our community," Brenda was saying. "Mr. Quinton thinks he can extort money from us, but we have rights. We have every right to use this road, and we're not paying his ridiculous fees." Several people nodded in agreement. Others looked uncertain. "Good morning, everyone," I said loudly, approaching the group. The conversation stopped. Brenda turned to face me, her expression a mix of anger and satisfaction, like she'd been hoping I would come out. "Mr. Quinton," she said formally, "we're just informing the neighborhood about your attempts to extort money from longtime residents." "That's not what's happening, and you know it," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. I looked at the gathered residents. "I'm happy to explain the situation to anyone who wants to hear it. Mrs. Morrison sent me a fine for parking my RV on my own property, behind a fence, based on a bylaw that doesn't actually apply. When I refused to pay an illegitimate fine, she threatened to put a lien on my house. The road maintenance fee is simply me exercising the same kind of property rights she claimed to be enforcing." "You're trying to profit off your neighbors," Brenda snapped. "The fee is $500 per year," I said. "That's less than your HOA dues. And it's a legitimate maintenance expense for a private road. My attorney has confirmed everything is legal." A man I recognized from 3 houses down spoke up. "But we've been using this road for years without any fees." "That's true," I acknowledged. "And honestly, I never intended to charge anyone anything. I didn't even realize I owned the road until Mrs. Morrison started threatening me. I'm not trying to make money or cause problems. I just want to be left alone to park my RV on my own property in peace." "So this is retaliation," Brenda said triumphantly. "You admit it." "I admit that I'm standing up to bullying. There's a difference." An older woman I'd seen walking her dog in the morning spoke up. "Brenda, I've seen his RV. You can barely tell it's there. Why is this such a big deal?" "Because we have standards," Brenda said, her voice rising. "If we let him get away with this, what's next? Boats, commercial trucks. The rules exist for a reason." "The rules don't actually prohibit what he's doing," another voice said. I turned to see a younger woman in her 30s stepping forward. "I'm Rachel Holloway. I live on Desert Vista Drive too. When this whole thing started, I actually read the bylaws. Section 7.3 only covers street parking and driveways. It says nothing about RVs stored on your property behind appropriate screening. Brenda's face flushed. The spirit of the rule, the spirit doesn't matter, Rachel interrupted. The actual words matter. That's how rules work. You can't fine someone for violating a rule that doesn't exist. Several people in the group were nodding now. I could see Brenda losing control of the narrative. If you all want to side with him, that's your choice, Brenda said coldly. But the HOA board stands by our decision. Mr. Quinton is in violation and he will face the consequences. As for these ridiculous road fees, our attorney will be filing a lawsuit by Monday. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. About half the group followed her. The rest remained, looking uncomfortable. Rachel Holloway approached me. I'm sorry about all this. Brenda has been on a power trip for months now. She fined the Johnsons for having their trash cans visible from the street for more than 2 hours after pickup. She threatened the Martinez because their front door wreath was the wrong shade of red. It's gotten out of hand. Why don't people vote her out? I asked. Most people don't pay attention to HOA politics until it affects them directly. Brenda runs unopposed because no one else wants to deal with the headache. But this road fee thing affects everyone, so maybe people will finally wake up. The older woman with the dog came over too. I'm Dorothy Sullivan. I've lived here since this subdivision was built in 1997. I remember when they put in this road. There was always something odd about the ownership, but no one really cared because we could all use it. I think Brenda's finally picked a fight with the wrong person. Over the next hour, I talked with several neighbors explaining the full situation. Most of them were reasonable people who just wanted to live in peace. They weren't happy about the potential road fees, but they understood why I had imposed them. A few even offered to talk to Brenda on my behalf, though I wasn't optimistic that would help. By Sunday evening, I had received calls and visits from 11 different households offering to pay the road fee in exchange for me dropping the RV complaint. But that wasn't how this worked. The HOA, not individual homeowners, was coming after me. And only Brenda seemed to have the power to call off the dogs. Monday morning, Patricia Chen called me. I just received notice that the HOA has filed a lawsuit challenging your right to impose the maintenance fees. They're arguing that the easement prevents you from charging for access. Can they win? Unlikely. The easement grants access but doesn't prohibit reasonable fees, especially for actual maintenance. Roads do need upkeep after all, but this is going to drag out for months, possibly a year or more. Are you prepared for that? I thought about it. A year of legal battles, stress, and escalating tensions with at least some of my neighbors. Or I could back down, pay the bogus fines and move my RV to a storage facility, which would cost me nearly $200 a month. I'm prepared, I said. I'm not backing down. Good. Then neither am I. Let's make this interesting. Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated in strange ways. Someone I suspected at Brenda's direction reported my RV to the city, claiming it was abandoned or improperly stored. A code enforcement officer came by, inspected it, and found no violations. It was properly registered, insured, and stored on private property with adequate screening. Then someone filed a complaint with the fire department, claiming the RV was a fire hazard. Another inspection, another clean report. The harassment was petty but persistent. My mail was mysteriously misdelivered several times. Someone spread rumors that I was planning to charge tolls for using the road, which wasn't true and wasn't even legally possible given the easement terms. A few neighbors stopped waving when they saw me, but others rallied to my side. Rachel Holloway started a petition to recall Brenda from the HOA board. Dorothy Sullivan organized a neighborhood meeting, independent of the HOA, to discuss the situation. And several people began documenting Brenda's other overreaches, building a case that this was part of a pattern of abuse of authority. The lawsuit moved slowly, as lawsuits do. There were motions and counter-motions, discovery requests, and procedural delays. Patricia kept me informed but told me not to expect any resolution soon. Then, about 6 weeks into this mess, something unexpected happened. I was working from home. I'm a software developer and mostly work remotely when I heard a loud bang from outside. Looking out my window, I saw smoke rising from the road about a quarter-mile down. I grabbed my phone and ran outside. Other neighbors were emerging from their houses, all moving toward the smoke. As I got closer, I saw that a car had crashed into one of the large mailbox structures that served several houses. The vehicle was crumpled against the brick structure, steam rising from the engine. I dialed 911 while running toward the car. Inside, I could see a young woman slumped over the steering wheel. The door was jammed, but the passenger side opened. I climbed in and checked her pulse steady, and she was breathing but unconscious. There was blood on her forehead. "Stay back," I yelled to the gathering crowd. "Someone might want to get a fire extinguisher, just in case." The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes, followed closely by fire trucks and police. The paramedics took over, carefully extracting the woman and getting her onto a stretcher. She began to regain consciousness as they worked, moaning in pain but responsive. A police officer approached me. "You were first on scene." "Yes, officer, I heard the crash and came running." "Did you see what happened?" "No, I just heard the bang and saw the smoke." He nodded, taking notes. Then he walked over to examine the road where the accident had occurred. I followed, curious. The officer crouched down, looking at the pavement. There was a massive pothole, at least 3 feet across and several inches deep, right in the driving lane. Chunks of asphalt were scattered around it. "That's a hell of a pothole," the officer said. "She probably hit it going too fast, lost control." I stared at the damage. The road had seemed fine yesterday, but looking more carefully now, I could see that this section of pavement was in rough shape. There were cracks, patches, and several other developing potholes. "Who maintains this road?" the officer asked. "It's a private road. I actually own it, but there's an easement for the subdivision residents." The officer looked up at me, interested. "Private road? Then you're responsible for maintenance." A chill went through me. "I suppose so, but I just found out I owned it a few weeks ago. It's been here for decades." "Still your responsibility if you're the owner. You might want to get this fixed before someone else gets hurt." He handed me his card. "I'll need a full statement from you about what you saw. Give me a call tomorrow." As the emergency vehicles left and the crowd dispersed, I stood looking at the pothole, my mind racing. The road was in worse shape than I'd realized. If I truly was responsible for maintenance, I had a serious liability issue. That $500 annual fee wasn't looking so unreasonable anymore. It would take hundreds of thousands of dollars to properly resurface and maintain a mile of private road. I called Patricia immediately. "The officer was right," she said after I explained the situation. "As the landowner, you're responsible for maintaining safe conditions, even with an easement. This actually strengthens your position on the maintenance fees. You're not just inventing a charge, there's a real, documented need for road repairs. Get some quotes from paving companies. Document everything. Take photos and video of the road conditions." I spent the rest of the afternoon doing exactly that. Walking the entire length of Riverside Meadows Drive, I found dozens of potholes, numerous cracks, several sections where the pavement was crumbling at the edges, and 3 areas where drainage issues were causing erosion underneath the road surface. The paving quotes I received over the next few days were sobering. To properly repair and resurface the road, $280,000. To do patch repairs and band-aid the worst spots, $45,000. With 68 houses in the subdivision, a $500 annual fee would bring in $34,000 per year. It would take years to accumulate enough for proper repairs, and that wasn't even accounting for ongoing maintenance. I shared all this information with Patricia, who incorporated it into our legal response to the HOA's lawsuit. 2 days later, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mr. Quinton, this is Gerald Peterman. I'm the attorney representing the Riverside Meadows HOA. Hello, Mr. Peterman. I've reviewed the information your attorney provided about the road conditions. I've also done my own inspection. You have a significant liability exposure here. I'm aware. I'd like to discuss a settlement. What if the HOA took over responsibility for road maintenance? We could establish a special assessment to cover the costs, and you could waive the annual fees." It was a reasonable offer, but something in his tone made me suspicious. That would require me to transfer ownership of the road to the HOA. Well, yes, it would be the simplest solution. And if I refuse, there was a pause. "Mr. Quinton, that accident could have been much worse. If someone had been seriously injured or killed, you could be facing a wrongful death lawsuit. Your homeowner's insurance might not even cover it since this is essentially a commercial liability. You could lose everything." There it was, not an offer, a threat. "Mr. Peterman, I'm not transferring ownership of anything. If the HOA wants to take over maintenance, we can draft an agreement where they handle the work and assessments, but the land stays in my name. Otherwise, the fees stand, and I'll use that money to make the necessary repairs. Talk to your client and let me know what they decide." I hung up and immediately called Patricia to fill her in. "They're trying to scare you into giving up the land," she said. "Don't fall for it. Yes, you have liability exposure, but so does any landowner. We'll get you proper insurance coverage." And their offer actually shows they're worried about our case. They wouldn't be trying to settle if they thought they could win in court. That evening, I attended the independent neighborhood meeting that Dorothy Sullivan had organized. It was held at Rachel Holloway's house, and about 30 residents showed up, almost half the subdivision. Dorothy opened the meeting. "We're here to discuss the ongoing situation with Mr. Quinton, the HOA, and Riverside Meadows Drive. I think a lot of misinformation has been floating around, so let's get the facts straight." I explained everything: the RV fine, the road ownership, the maintenance fees, and now the accident and repair needs. I showed photos of the road damage and shared the repair quotes. "So you're saying the road really does need hundreds of thousands of dollars in work?" someone asked. "Yes. And as the owner, I'm liable if someone gets hurt because of poor maintenance. The $500 fee isn't about making money. It's about covering a genuine expense." "What about the HOA taking over?" Rachel asked. "Their attorney offered that today, but they want me to transfer ownership. I'm not comfortable doing that, especially given how this whole situation started. But I'd be willing to work out an agreement where they handle maintenance while I retain ownership." A man I didn't recognize raised his hand. "I'm Tom Patterson. I'm on the HOA board, the treasurer. Brenda didn't tell the rest of us she was going after you about the RV until after she'd already sent the fine letter. When a few of us questioned whether she was interpreting the bylaws correctly, she shut us down. This whole thing has been her personal crusade. This was new information." So the board didn't actually vote on the fine. Not officially. Brenda said it was within her authority as president to enforce violations. We're supposed to review disputes, but she said there was no dispute because the rule was clear. Except, as it turns out, the rule isn't clear and several of us don't think it even applies. The room erupted in conversation. Dorothy had to call for order several times. "Tom, are you saying Brenda has been acting without board authority?" Rachel asked. "In this case, yes. And I've been going back through the records. She's done it before. The fine against the Johnsons, never voted on. The threat against the Martineses, same thing. She's been making unilateral decisions and claiming board authority." "That's not legal," someone said. "HOA boards have to vote on enforcement actions." "Exactly," Tom said. "Which is why I'm calling for a special board meeting to review all of Mrs. Morrison's recent actions as president. And I'm going to recommend we rescind the fine against Mr. Quinton, apologize for the overreach, and work with him cooperatively on the road maintenance issue." The mood in the room shifted dramatically. What had been a contentious situation was suddenly looking like it might have a reasonable resolution. But I knew Brenda well enough by now to know she wouldn't go quietly. The special board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community clubhouse. It was open to all residents, and the crowd that showed up was the largest HOA gathering anyone could remember. Brenda sat at the front table with the 4 other board members: Tom Patterson, an older man named Vincent Ross, a middle-aged woman named Sandra Kim, and a younger guy named Marcus Thompson. Brenda looked calm and composed, but I could see the tension in her jaw. Tom called the meeting to order and explained the purpose: to review recent enforcement actions taken by the president and determine whether proper procedures had been followed. Brenda immediately objected. "This is ridiculous. I've been acting in the best interests of the community, enforcing our bylaws as I'm authorized to do as president. The bylaws require board votes on fines and enforcement actions," Tom said, pulling out a binder. "I have the governing documents right here. Section 12.4 clearly states that violations must be reviewed by the board, notice given to the homeowner, an opportunity for hearing provided, and then a vote taken. You sent Mr. Quinton a fine without any of that process." "The violation was obvious," Brenda snapped. "We don't need a full hearing for clear-cut cases." "Yes, we do," Vincent Ross said quietly. He was a retired attorney, I'd learned. "The procedures exist to protect homeowners from exactly this kind of arbitrary action, and from what I understand, this wasn't even a clear-cut case. The bylaw in question doesn't actually prohibit what Mr. Quinton was doing." Sandra Kim nodded. "I've read Section 7.3 multiple times now. It restricts parking of oversized vehicles on streets and driveways. Mr. Quinton's RV is on his property behind a fence. I don't see a violation." "It's visible from other properties," Brenda protested. "So what?" Marcus Thompson said. "Lots of things are visible from other properties. That doesn't make them violations. Unless there's a specific restriction in the bylaws, homeowners can use their property as they see fit." Brenda's face was getting red. "So you're all just going to side with him? He's extorting the entire neighborhood." "Actually, after reviewing the situation, I don't think he is," Tom said. "He owns the road. The maintenance fees are legal. And given the condition of the road and the recent accident, they're also necessary. We should be working with him, not fighting him. I move that we rescind the fine against Isaac Quinton and issue a formal apology," Vincent said. "I second," Sandra added. "All in favor?" Tom asked. 4 hands went up. Only Brenda's remained down. "The motion passes," Tom said. Mr. Quinton, on behalf of the Riverside Meadows HOA, I apologize for the inappropriate fine and the manner in which this situation was handled. I nodded, accepting the apology. But I could see Brenda seething at the table. Furthermore, Tom continued, I move that we open negotiations with Mr. Quinton regarding road maintenance. The HOA should take responsibility for coordinating and funding necessary repairs through a special assessment while respecting Mr. Quinton's ownership rights. Seconded, Vincent said immediately. Again, 4 votes in favor. Brenda abstained, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. As the meeting continued, other residents raised concerns about Brenda's other enforcement actions. The Johnsons spoke about their trash can fine. The Martinses described being threatened over their holiday decorations. A young couple described being harassed about the color of their mailbox, which was apparently 2 shades darker than Brenda deemed acceptable. By the end of the meeting, Tom had made another motion to hold a special election for HOA president within 60 days, with Brenda's role limited to administrative duties only in the interim. This motion also passed 4-1. Brenda stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You're all making a huge mistake. Without strong enforcement, this community will fall apart. Property values will plummet. But fine. Do what you want. I'm done trying to protect you from yourselves. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the clubhouse, slamming the door behind her. The room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping. Others joined in, and soon the entire room was applauding. It wasn't about me, it was about standing up to a bully who had been making everyone's lives miserable. After the meeting, I stayed to talk with Tom and the other board members about the road maintenance plan. We agreed that the HOA would get additional bids for the repair work, put together a fair special assessment based on actual costs, and handle all the contracting and project management. I would waive my annual maintenance fees in exchange for the HOA taking on this responsibility, and we'd draft a formal agreement outlining everyone's obligations. It was exactly the kind of reasonable compromise that should have happened from the beginning. Walking to my car, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The nightmare was finally ending, but I should have known better. Brenda Morrison wasn't done yet. 3 days later, I woke up to find bright orange spray paint all over my driveway and garage door. The words "neighborhood terrorist" and "you don't belong here" were scrawled in jagged letters across the concrete and white paint. I immediately called the police and took photos of everything before it could be cleaned. The responding officer took a report and said they'd investigate, but without witnesses or security camera footage, there wasn't much they could do. "You have any idea who might have done this?" the officer asked. "I have a suspicion, but no proof," I said. I explained the situation with Brenda and the HOA dispute. The officer wrote everything down. "I'd recommend installing security cameras. If this happens again and we can identify who's doing it, we can press charges for vandalism and possibly harassment." I spent that afternoon at a hardware store, buying a complete security camera system. By evening, I had cameras covering every angle of my property, all connected to cloud storage so the footage couldn't be tampered with. The vandalism had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. This had gone from a property dispute to something personal and vindictive. I started wondering if I should just sell the house and move somewhere else. Life was too short to deal with this kind of hatred. But then, I thought about all the other neighbors who had stood up to Brenda. They were counting on the board changes to make things better. If I left now, it would feel like letting the bully win. I decided to stay and see it through. The next incident happened 4 days later. I was in my backyard when I heard a loud hissing sound from the front of the house. Running around, I found that all 4 tires on my truck had been slashed. This time, I had video. The footage showed a figure in dark clothes and a hood approaching my truck around 3 in the morning. They moved quickly, slashing each tire with what looked like a knife, then hurrying away. The image quality wasn't perfect due to the darkness, but there were identifying details. The person was wearing distinctive white sneakers with red stripes, and they had a noticeable limp, favoring their right leg. I called the police again. The same officer from before came out, and his demeanor was much more serious this time. "This is escalating," he said, reviewing the footage. "We're talking about hundreds of dollars in damage now. With the video evidence, we can probably get somewhere with this. Do you recognize anything about the person? The limp is distinctive. And I think those might be Nike shoes, the red and white Air Max style, but I can't identify who it is from this footage. We'll canvass the neighborhood, see if anyone else has security footage that might show this person coming or going. In the meantime, I'm going to increase patrols in this area, and I want you to document everything. Every incident, every threat, every piece of evidence. If this continues, we may be looking at stalking or harassment charges, which are more serious." Over the next week, I barely slept. Every sound outside had me checking the cameras. I was jumpy and stressed, constantly looking over my shoulder. The psychological toll of being targeted was worse than the actual damage, but then something unexpected happened. Dorothy Sullivan called me one evening, her voice excited. "Isaac, you need to see this. Can you come to my house?" Dorothy lived 2 streets over from me. When I arrived, she led me to her living room where her laptop was open on the coffee table. On the screen was security camera footage from her doorbell camera. "This is from 3 nights ago, around 2:45 in the morning," she said. "Watch the bottom left of the frame." I watched as a figure in dark clothes walked past, heading in the direction of my house. The person was limping and wearing white sneakers with red stripes. "Can you zoom in?" I asked, my heart pounding. Dorothy clicked a few buttons, enhancing the image. As the figure passed under a streetlight, their face was briefly visible. It was Brenda Morrison. "I didn't think anything of it when I first saw this footage," Dorothy said. "I was reviewing it because someone knocked over my trash cans that night, and I wanted to see who did it. But when I heard about your slashed tires, I remembered seeing this person limping. And I know Brenda hurt her knee a few weeks ago playing tennis. She's been walking with a limp ever since." "This is evidence," I said, pulling out my phone. "I need to call the police right now." The officer who had been handling my case, Detective James Morrison, no relation to Brenda, thankfully came to Dorothy's house within an hour. He reviewed the footage multiple times, taking notes. "This gives us enough for a search warrant," he said. "If we can find the shoes, the clothing, or the knife used in the vandalism, we can make an arrest. Mr. Quinton, I need you to come to the station tomorrow and make a formal statement about everything that's happened, going back to the beginning of your dispute with Mrs. Morrison. I want a complete timeline." I spent 3 hours at the police station the next day, walking through everything. The initial RV fine, the escalating threats, the lawsuit, the HOA meeting where Brenda was stripped of most of her authority, and then the vandalism. Detective Morrison took detailed notes and made copies of all my evidence. "This paints a clear picture of harassment and retaliation," he said. "Combined with the video evidence, we have a strong case. We'll execute the search warrant tomorrow morning." I went home feeling vindicated but also sad. I had never wanted things to go this far. All I had wanted was to park my RV in peace. The next afternoon, Detective Morrison called me. "We found the shoes, the knife, and the clothing she wore, all hidden in her garage. Mrs. Morrison initially denied everything, but when confronted with the evidence, she admitted to the vandalism. She's been arrested and charged with criminal mischief and harassment. She'll be arraigned tomorrow. What happens now? That depends on a lot of factors. The prosecutor will decide what charges to pursue. Mrs. Morrison will probably try to plead it down to something minor, pay restitution, maybe do community service. But she'll have a criminal record, and I doubt she'll be bothering you anymore. That evening, I got a call from Tom Patterson. I heard about Brenda's arrest, he said. The board held an emergency meeting, and we voted to remove her as president effective immediately. We're also banning her from holding any HOA position in the future. I'm so sorry you went through all this, Isaac. This should never have happened. I appreciate that, Tom. I'm just glad it's over. We've also finalized the road maintenance agreement. The special assessment will be $800 per household, paid over 2 years. That'll give us enough to do the full resurfacing and repairs. Your annual fees are waived permanently. The agreement will be ready for your signature next week. That sounds fair. Thank you. No, thank you. You stood up when a lot of people were too afraid to. You've made this community better, even if it didn't feel like it at the time. The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings and administrative tasks. Brenda Morrison pleaded guilty to reduced charges and was sentenced to 1 year of probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay full restitution for all the damage she'd caused, nearly $3,000, when everything was totaled up. The HOA held its special election, and Rachel Holloway was elected president by an overwhelming margin. One of her first acts was to review and clarify all the subdivision bylaws, eliminating ambiguous language and ensuring that enforcement procedures were clearly defined and fairly applied. The road repairs began in late April. It took a crew 3 weeks to complete the work, but when they were finished, Riverside Meadows Drive looked brand new. Smooth, dark asphalt with crisp white lines and proper drainage on both sides. My RV still sits in my backyard, behind the fence where it's always been. No one has complained about it since. One Saturday morning in May, I was washing my truck, the one with new tires that the HOA had actually helped pay for as a goodwill gesture, when Dorothy Sullivan walked by with her dog. "Morning, Isaac. Beautiful day, isn't it?" "It sure is, Dorothy. You know, when you first moved in, I wasn't sure about you. Quiet guy, kept to himself, had that big RV. I thought you might be trouble," I laughed. "Instead, I brought the trouble out." "No, you brought the solution out. This neighborhood is so much better now. People are friendlier. The HOA is reasonable. Even the roads are better." She smiled. "I'm glad you didn't give up and move away." "Me too." She continued her walk, and I went back to washing my truck, thinking about how strange life could be. 6 months ago, I'd moved here looking for peace and quiet, a place to call home. Instead, I'd gotten drawn into a war over property rights and petty bureaucracy. But sometimes you have to fight for your peace. Sometimes standing up to bullies is the only way to stop them. That evening, I hooked up my RV and took it out for a drive. I headed east into the desert, found a nice spot near a dry lake bed, and set up camp. The sunset painted the sky in oranges and purples, and the only sound was the wind rustling through the creosote bushes. This was why I had bought the RV in the first place. Freedom, adventure, the ability to just go whenever the mood struck. As I sat in my camping chair watching the stars come out, I thought about the road back home, my road, technically. The one I owned but everyone could use. It seemed like a pretty good metaphor for community living. We all have our property, our rights, our boundaries, but we share the roads that connect us. And when everyone respects both ownership and shared space, things work pretty well. The next morning, I drove back to Riverside Meadows, back to my house at the end of that smooth, newly paved road. My neighbor across the street, a guy named Paul whom I'd barely spoken to before all the drama, was outside watering his lawn. He waved as I pulled into my driveway. "Good trip." He called out. "Great trip," I said. "You should try it sometime." "Maybe I will. My wife and I have been thinking about getting a camper. Hey, if we do, think we could park it behind our fence like you do?" I grinned. "According to the bylaws, as recently clarified, absolutely." He laughed and went back to his watering. I backed my RV into its spot in the backyard, right where it belonged, where it had always been allowed to be. Then I went inside, made myself lunch, and got back to work. Just a regular day in the neighborhood, exactly what I'd wanted from the beginning. The legal settlement with the HOA was finalized in June. My attorney, Patricia Chen, had negotiated a clause that made me smile. Any future changes to the subdivision's bylaws regarding vehicle storage or road usage required my written approval. It was a small protection, but an important one. The HOA couldn't change the rules to retroactively target me or anyone else ever again. I also worked with Patricia to draft a more formal road maintenance agreement. While the HOA was handling the current repairs, we wanted to ensure there was a clear plan for ongoing upkeep. The agreement established a road maintenance fund, with annual contributions from all households. I waived my maintenance fees permanently in exchange for the HOA assuming all liability for the road's condition. It was a genuine partnership, the kind that should have existed from the start. In August, the Riverside Meadows HOA held its first annual summer barbecue in years. Rachel Holloway had organized it as a community building event, something to help everyone move past the tensions of the previous months. I almost didn't go. Despite the resolution, I still felt a bit like an outsider, the guy who had caused all the trouble. But Dorothy Sullivan wouldn't take no for an answer. "You're coming," she said when she called me the morning of the event. "I'm making my famous potato salad, and I need someone to tell me it's better than Sandra Kim's coleslaw. You're elected." So I went, bringing a case of beer and low expectations. The party was held at the community clubhouse, with tables set up outside and a large grill smoking with burgers and hot dogs. Kids were running around playing tag. Adults stood in small groups, chatting and laughing. It looked like a scene from a suburban movie, almost too perfect to be real. Rachel spotted me as soon as I arrived. "Isaac, you made it. Come on, I want you to meet some people." She introduced me to families I'd never spoken with, people who lived on the other side of the subdivision and hadn't been involved in the HOA drama. They were friendly and welcoming, asking about my work and my RV adventures. No one mentioned the lawsuit or the vandalism or any of the ugliness that had dominated the first half of the year. At one point, Tom Patterson clinked a glass to get everyone's attention. "I just want to say a few words," he announced. "This past year has been challenging for our community. We had some difficult situations, some hard conversations, and some necessary changes. But we came through it stronger and more united than before. We learned that rules exist to serve us, not control us. We learned that property rights matter, but so does cooperation. And we learned that when we work together respectfully, we can solve any problem." He raised his glass. "So here's to Riverside Meadows. Here's to good neighbors. And here's to moving forward together." Everyone cheered and drank. I felt a lump in my throat, surprised by how emotional I suddenly felt. These people weren't just neighbors anymore. They were my community. Later, as the sun was setting and the party was winding down, Rachel came over to where I was sitting. "Thank you for sticking it out," she said. "I know there were times when it would have been easier to just leave." There were definitely times I considered it, I admitted. But I'm glad I stayed. You did more than stay. You stood up when it mattered. A lot of people in this neighborhood were unhappy with how things were being run, but no one wanted to be the first to speak up. You gave everyone else permission to stand up too. I was just trying to park my RV, I said with a laugh. Sometimes the smallest things spark the biggest changes. She smiled. So, what's next for you? More camping trips? Actually, I've been thinking about exploring more of Arizona. There are some amazing spots up north near Sedona. Maybe take a week off and just disconnect. That sounds perfect. And when you get back, you should come to the HOA meetings. We could use your perspective on the board. I raised an eyebrow. You want me on the HOA board? Why not? You understand property law better than most of us now. And you're not afraid to ask tough questions. Those are exactly the qualities we need. It was a surreal suggestion, given where things had started, but thinking about it, I realized she was right. If I wanted to make sure something like Brenda's abuse of power never happened again, the best way to do that was to be actively involved in the HOA's governance. Let me think about it, I said, but I'm not opposed to the idea. Over the next few months, life in Riverside Meadows settled into a comfortable rhythm. The road stayed in perfect condition. The HOA focused on genuine community improvements rather than petty enforcement, and I found myself becoming more involved in neighborhood activities. I did join the HOA board in October, filling a vacancy when Vincent Ross decided to step down due to health issues. My first project was working with a local attorney to completely rewrite the subdivision's bylaws, making them clear, fair, and enforceable. We eliminated outdated restrictions, clarified ambiguous language, and added strong protections against arbitrary enforcement. The new bylaws were approved by an overwhelming majority of homeowners in December. I also organized a neighborhood watch program, partly inspired by my own experience with vandalism. We got security cameras installed at key intersections throughout the subdivision, creating a network that could help solve crimes and deter future incidents. And I finally took that trip to Sedona. I spent a week camped in the Red Rock country, hiking during the days and stargazing at night. It was exactly the reset I needed. When I got back, I found a letter waiting for me. It was from Brenda Morrison. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten, the script shaky and uncertain. "Dear Mr. Quinton," it began, "I owe you an apology that can never be adequate for what I put you through. My actions were wrong, illegal, and caused you significant harm. I've spent the past several months in therapy, trying to understand why I behaved the way I did. The truth is that I felt powerless in most areas of my life, and the HOA presidency gave me a sense of control that I became addicted to. When you challenged that control, I responded in the worst possible way. I'm not asking for forgiveness, because I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I recognize the harm I caused, and I'm truly sorry. I'm selling my house and moving out of state to be closer to my daughter. I hope that brings you and the other neighbors some peace. Sincerely, Brenda Morrison." I read the letter twice, then set it down. It didn't change what had happened, but it did provide some closure. Brenda was a cautionary tale about what happens when people prioritize control over community, rules over relationships. I hope she found the help she needed. By the time the year anniversary of my RV fine rolled around, Riverside Meadows had transformed completely. Property values had actually increased, not because of strict HOA enforcement, but because word had spread that it was a great place to live, reasonable rules, good amenities, friendly neighbors. Rachel Holloway organized another community event to celebrate 1 year under the new HOA leadership. This time, it was a weekend camping trip to a nearby state park, and she asked if I would help organize it since I was the RV expert. 15 families came on the trip, including several who had bought RVs and campers specifically because they'd seen mine and gotten inspired. We had a fantastic weekend of hiking, campfire stories, and outdoor cooking. The kids played together, the adults relaxed, and everyone came back feeling closer as a community. On the last night of the trip, sitting around the campfire, someone asked me if I ever regretted fighting the HOA fine instead of just paying it and moving my RV. I thought about it for a moment. No, I said finally. The money wasn't the point. The RV wasn't even really the point. It was about standing up for what was right. If I'd backed down, Brenda would have kept targeting other people. Someone had to draw a line. But you almost lost everything, someone else said. The legal fees, the vandalism, the stress, was it worth it? I looked around at the faces illuminated by firelight, my neighbors, my friends, my community. Yes, I said. It was worth it. The story could have ended there with lessons learned and happy endings all around, but life is rarely that neat. In February, I received a call from an attorney representing Brenda Morrison's estate. She had passed away suddenly from a heart attack, and in her will, she had left me something. The deed to a small parcel of land she owned adjacent to Riverside Meadows. It was a strange, final gesture that I didn't quite understand until the attorney explained. Mrs. Morrison purchased this land years ago, intending to develop it, but the parcel was landlocked, with no direct access to public roads. The only access was through an easement across Riverside Meadows Drive, your road. In her final months, she apparently wanted to make amends, and she thought giving you this land might help. The parcel was only 2 acres, mostly empty desert, but it had something interesting. A natural spring that had been capped years ago but could potentially be restored. Water rights in Arizona were valuable, and the spring could potentially provide supplemental water for the entire subdivision. I worked with the HOA to develop the property as a community park. We restored the spring, creating a small pond that attracted wildlife. We built walking trails and installed benches, and we put up a simple plaque that read, Riverside Meadows Community Park, a gift of reconciliation. May we always choose community over conflict. The park opened in May, and it quickly became the heart of the neighborhood. Kids fed the ducks at the pond. Adults walked the trails in the evening. People held birthday parties and small gatherings there. It was a reminder that even the worst conflicts could eventually lead to something positive if people were willing to change and grow. As for me, I'm still living at 4287 Desert Vista Drive. My RV is still parked in the backyard, though I use it at least once a month for weekend adventures. The road outside my house is smooth and well maintained. The HOA is run fairly and transparently, and I've found a sense of belonging that I never expected. Sometimes people ask me if I would do anything differently, knowing what I know now. Would I have avoided the whole situation somehow, been more diplomatic, found a compromise earlier? The answer is no. Some fights are worth having. Some lines need to be drawn. And sometimes the only way to create positive change is to be willing to stand alone, even when it's hard, even when it's scary. My grandfather bought that road as an investment, never imagining it would matter. But it did matter. It mattered because property rights matter. Because standing up to bullies matters. Because sometimes the smallest piece of land can make the biggest difference. The road still belongs to me, legally and officially. But in every way that truly matters, it belongs to all of us. We maintain it together. We use it together, and we take pride in it together. That's what community means. Not a bunch of rules enforced by petty tyrants, but a shared commitment to taking care of each other and the spaces we inhabit together. And every time I drive down Riverside Meadows Drive, whether I'm heading out for an RV adventure or just coming home from work, I remember what I learned from all of this. Ownership is important, but stewardship is what really matters. You can own something legally, but what you do with that ownership defines who you are. I chose to use mine to build community, and that has made all the difference.